my name is Ian, and welcome to the Green Podcast. Here with me, I have the sagacious Kacie
Sup, y'all?
and Edward V here to deliver his wisdom.
Hi.
Alright, so in the 1950s and 60s, there were a lot of questions circulating about how to properly raise children. Daycare was particularly under intense scrutiny because women were slowly joining the workforce more and staying at home less. But people believed that the exposure to other kids were making them badly behaved.
Yeah, that was proved wrong, though. The kids all benefited from it in the end.
Right. Well, there was also major social changes happening. Emmett Till was murdered in 1955, and the space age had just begun. So the US government was shelling out major cash to the NASA program and other space weapons pursuits.
Oh, that's right. Man, Emmett Till getting killed was huge for really rallying the support for the civil rights movement.
Get to the point.
Well, the point is that social development and other developments were in the forefront of people's minds. The whole situation was the perfect context for scientist Albert Bandura to start his experiments on the behavioral learning of children. He had a theory that children learn social behavior through observation and imitation only. So in 1961, he decided to test this theory with the Bobo doll experiment.
That's deep, man. But what the heck is a Bobo doll? I'm picturing like a Teletubby or a teddy bear or something.
Actually, a Bobo doll is like an inflatable punching bag with a center of gravity at the bottom, so if you punch the doll, it will swing forward and back.
How does that test the kids? I'll punch a Bobo doll. Doesn't have to be for an experiment.
Calm down, there's no need for violence. To answer your question though, in his experiment, Bandura took 72 children and split them into 3 groups. All of the groups were put into rooms filled with toys. 24 children were just kind of thrown in a room with no supervision. They were the control group. Another 24 were put into a room with an adult. 12 with a man, 12 with a woman, who were just playing with the toys passively. The last 24, however, were put into a room with an adult. 12 with a man, 12 with a woman, who was attacking the dolls. We're talking punching, chopping, verbally abusing, anything that they wanted to.
Wow, that last adult had some issues.
Well, not exactly. See, the point of their attacking the doll versus not attacking it was to see how the different behaviors might influence the behavior of the children witnessing it.
Well, why did he have some with women and some with men?
Well, Bandura had an interesting theory that the children would respond more similarly to the adult if it was of the same sex. He thought that they would be more relatable.
Yeah, whatever.
Also, each group had an equal ratio of boys to girls, and that's because Bandura thought boys would show more aggressive tendencies than the girls, so he wanted the same number to compare.
It's also important to note that Bandura didn't just grab these kids off the streets and throw them into rooms filled with toys. They were children attending a daycare at Stanford, most with parents who were professors, students, or alumni. So there is some criticism of this experiment because the children were all raised with the luxury of having educated parents and they all lived in the same geographical region.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they were all the same, though.
No, they weren't. Bandura actually did some research on these little people, found out their general mannerisms and personalities, in an attempt to keep it as uniform as possible.
Who is this Bandura guy anyway?
Bandura was a very influential developmental psychologist responsible for advances in many fields of psychology over the 6 decades of his career. His most notable contributions were his social learning theory, which is what is covered in the Bobo doll experiment, and the theory of self-efficacy. He had been called the greatest living psychologist, and his legacy is within the ranks of Freud, Jean Piaget, and their contemporaries.
Well, let's slow down a little bit, shall we? What's social learning? Self-efficacy? I hope that's not what I think it is.
The social learning theory is basically the idea that when people learn, they learn within a social context, meaning they're influenced by the actions of the people around them.
Wow, that's really deep. But what this theory is essentially saying is that we're followers by nature?
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying.
Think of it like this. A student usually imitates what the teacher demonstrates in front of them.
Duh. There's no need for a big experiment to show that.
Well, it seems obvious now, but back then this stuff wasn't set in stone. People just kind of speculated. The biggest part of Bandura's actions was that he approached these subjects with an empirical mindset.
I'll approach you with an empirical mindset if you don't want it yourself.
No. Empirical means that he was trying to prove things that can't really be proven in the conventional sense. His data had to be based on observation and experience.
Why should we believe it if it isn't factual, though? Sounds kind of shady to me.
Okay, listen, his findings weren't just speculation. They are as close to fact as anyone could get when it comes to this. As a result, he laid down a clear and solid foundation for psychological findings that people could build upon.
In order to learn more about this, we will go back in time to the event of the experiment. Look, it's Albert Bandura.
Welcome all to my genius, fantastic experiment. I am Albert Bandura. Today we'll be breaking down the psychology of kids learning. My team and I are attempting to identify if children are learning from observation or from conventional education. This experiment can be broken down into 3 simple stages. In the first stage, we have 3 rooms. One with a control group of kids containing typical toys and no adult supervision. In the other 2 rooms, we have a group of kids who are witnessing an adult playing nicely with the toys, and one where they are violently assaulting the doll.
Die, Bobo doll, die, die!
As we expected during this stage of the experiment, the kids all generally tended to follow the example of their model. Those with an aggressive model tended to be more aggressive, and vice versa. The boys were significantly more so than their peers, and once again, that was as we expected.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the incidents of violence were 2 to 1 when comparing the boys and girls. But what we did not predict is that the girls were just as verbally aggressive as the boys, regardless of the fact that they did not physically attack the doll.
Yeah, also, the gender of the adult had a really interesting effect on the behavior of the kids. When the male was aggressive with Bobo, both girls and boys reacted in kind. Of course, the boys much more than the girls. But when the female was aggressive with Bobo, both genders were proportionally less physically aggressive, but were verbally aggressive to the same amount.
So, we can assume that females are just as likely to attack verbally as males, but half as likely to physically attack?
It does appear that way. Also, something peculiar that we witnessed is that the control group of children still exhibited some aggressive tendencies, whereas the group with nonviolent adult showed hardly any violence.
But that might prove my theory right. Now that time has passed in our experiment, we had our subjects return to see how they've changed. Expectedly, the kids who were not exposed to the adults remained more or less clueless, playing with the toys, some violent, some not. But for those who were exposed to the adults, whether non-violent or violent, they seemed to resume with essentially the same behaviors they showed previously.
After this experiment was put into stage 2, otherwise known as aggression arousal.
In stage 2, all the kids, including the control, were separately put into a room with relatively attractive toys and asked to play with them.
However, as soon as the kids started playing with these toys, they were taken away from the kids after being told that these toys were reserved for another kid. The point of this is obviously to aggravate the kids and to put them in a negative temper.
And, like I thought, the kids all attacked the doll more than what they did before. It's all Bobo's fault!
I wanted that shovel.
For the last stage of the experiment, we showed a whole new set of children videos instead of live adults. So just as before, there was the control group, the aggressive group, and the passive group, but there was simply a video of an adult.
As I suspected, the children reacted very similarly as those who were shown live adults, except at a lesser amount. The video was just not as potent as a live person. I am such a great psychologist.
Alright, I think we've seen enough. Let's go back to present time. There was one very important result from the Bobo doll experiment, and several other important ones as well. These conclusions were that boys are more physically aggressive than girls, but just as verbally aggressive, stereotypically speaking. Also, the children are more likely to follow the lead of a violent male than a violent female for whatever reason.
And the biggest is that the group of kids who were exposed to the violent adult were considerably more likely to engage in violent behavior than the control group and the group with a passive adult. One can assume from this that children are actively learning through observation.
Well, that's what Bandura thought. All right, not to burst your bubble or anything, but how does this apply to me?
For one, the results of these experiments suggest that violent media could directly affect the behavior of young individuals exposed to these forms of media. Since his results were published in the 60s, the Bobo doll experiment has been cited in many arguments involving the censorship of what would be considered violent, perverse media. From music to film and, of course, video games, controversy has surrounded and followed forms of media, and their more explicit versions since their inception and for decades after.
So basically, what you're saying is I should keep my kids far away from anything labeled mature. I knew all those mom magazines were right.
Well, not precisely. These findings only suggest that there is a direct relationship between exposure to violent media and violent psychological tendencies. The main takeaway from the Bobo doll experiment is not the behavior that the kids displayed, it's how they learned the behavior. We shouldn't forget to mention the idea of observational learning, which is just as important as what we just mentioned.
Oh my gosh, okay, observational learning? What's that? I feel like you two are just throwing out random terms.
Observational learning is the concept that people and animals don't just learn from being directly rewarded or punished, but also learn from watching their peers be rewarded or punished.
Well, why is that relevant?
Remember the social learning theory? Well, before the Bobo doll experiment, the current theory at the time, called behaviorism, thought that people only learn from a direct punishment and reward system. However, the Bobo doll experiment showed that when kids watched the adults in front of them abuse the Bobo doll, they repeated the behavior. They took that to mean that the children were learning through observing the adults.
But what if they just thought the adult was instructing them on what they were supposed to do? In school, that's basically what happens.
That's a valid point, and the main criticism of the experiment is that the kids thought that the adults were just showing them what they needed to do. However, the adult model demonstrating these behaviors were dismissed by another adult after 10 minutes in the room.
So, how does that justify it at all?
It meant that the adults were not the primary authority figure, unlike a teacher. These kids watched these adults being punished or rewarded for their behavior and then being dismissed from the room. So in a way, that showed the kids that the adults were on the same level as them.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But you said they assumed that the kids were learning from observation.
So then I can basically disregard this experiment, right? Because it didn't really prove anything.
Well, it might have proved Bandura's hypothesis that children learn social behavior through observation, or it could have proved that the children thought that hitting the Bobo doll was a fun game. The point is that children do learn a lot through observation, and that it's impossible to tell what is going on in another person's head.
Well, I could have told you that.
Fascinating. Well, that's about it, folks, for this podcast. Next time on the Green Podcast, we'll learn why dinosaurs are hardcore drug addicts.
Wait, hold on.
Probably.
What are dinosaurs?
Goodbye.